There's a guy in his late 30s, 40s, and ended up with a lot of toxic relationships where the women wanted to use him and they wanted finances, money from him. And he's always been in relationships with women that needed rescuing, women that needed help. And they played on his emotions of feeling guilty. So he had a lot of guilt, a lot of shame around it. And he just really wanted to help those women. And what he was doing was, instead of letting the women help themselves, he would always save them. And the women that he just kept on saving never have had the capacity to save themselves. So they're beautiful, they're stunning. So they've always had men throwing themselves at them. They always had men throwing money at them. And because of their beauty, they never had those resilient skills. So when they get into a relationship, because they don't have that resilient skill, because everybody rescued and saved them, they showed up in very dysfunctional ways. They didn't really have the coping skills to manage difficult situations. So they didn't have the resilience in the relationship. So when this guy just kept on repeating the same pattern, so he ended up with women who were beautiful, stunning, but needed rescuing a lot. And a lot of guilt and shame came up because he felt really bad for them. And then if he didn't rescue them, if he didn't do anything for them, if he didn't take away their pain, then he would have a lot of shame. Well, I'm a really bad guy and I'm awful for not helping. But what he didn't realize was that one of the important paths in life, even as a parent, especially as a parent, is allowing them to make their own mistakes and allowing them to have their own lessons in life, to be able to figure out, hey, I'm making my mistakes and here's how I can fix them, rather than everybody else fixing them for me. So when everybody else is fixing your problems for you, you do this as a child. But part of maturing and growing up is being able to manage your own problems and finding your own solutions, and then building. And this is what builds your self-worth, your self-esteem. And the resilience is when you're able to overcome these problems. But if everybody else is overcoming these problems for you, you're not going to build resilience. You're not going to have that self-esteem. You're not going to be having that accomplishment of like, I came over things. And then what happens is, the more you overcome problems, the more stronger and tougher you become. Whereas this guy, again, had his own problems solved and rescued by everybody else. So you can imagine when two people like that get into a relationship, they will have a real weak link. And if any of them collapse, then it will create chaos in that, and especially separation. So because they don't have that resilient skill, strength within them, any kind of abandonment or any kind of disconnection or loss will feel climatic. It will just feel too much to bear, that they'll go and be stuck in a cycle of, oh, you're going to leave me, and yeah, fuck you. And then they'll be like, oh no, it's too painful. I can't be alone. I don't want to be alone. I don't know how to be alone. And then they'll hold on to that relationship and bring it back in. And that was one of the biggest problems, was that he found it very difficult to be alone, to be with himself. And even though his psychology, he had a belief that I have good self-esteem, I'm lovable. But yet his actions were contradicted that, because if he had good self-esteem, he wouldn't tolerate substandard behavior. He wouldn't tolerate being abused. He wouldn't tolerate being used by women and other people, and he wouldn't tolerate that. So people with high self-esteem have high standards, and when they have high standards, they also have high boundaries. And people with high self-esteem also are consistent and be able to establish their boundaries and face the consequences. So somebody might not like you, somebody might shame you for setting boundaries. But with people with high self-esteem, they're okay with that loss. They understand that if I establish a boundary and that person leaves me, they're okay with that. Whereas a person with low self-esteem, when they establish a boundary, they say, I'm going to walk away, I'm going to leave you. They get afraid and then they want to be afraid of abandonment. So they then forego their boundary. They say, okay, don't worry about my boundary. Let's just come back, and then let's be all okay. So there isn't this constant loop of abandonment, engulfment. So abandonment happens, they get scared, they get terrified, they don't want to be alone, and then they engulf each other, and they engulf each other so much that they suffocate. And in that moment, they lose their own identity, they lose their own self in that suffocation, and then it gets too much, and then they push back, and this constant cycle of abandonment, engulfment. And these are usually people who, like this cycle, need a lot of stimulation in their life. They live on these incredible stimulating relationships, and they need a stimulating life. What they struggle with is boredom. They don't like to be bored, right? And that's why they find it very, very difficult to be still, to be on their own, to have no stimulants. This is why they're probably addicted to the mobile phone, because there's constant supply of stimulation. They need drama in their life. When you have a toxic relationship, it's high stimulant, and then it's a calm, it's the relief. It's like, when you intense your body a lot, and you feel the pain and you feel the tension, and when you tense your body a lot, and then you just let go, and you have that relief, and it feels good. That's what they're addicted to, that relief that comes, but then it comes through high stimulating, friction, volatile relationship. So when they let go and they find that relief, they find that comforting and soothing. But you don't need to get that from unhealthy places. There are many ways you can help to soothe yourself, so your body is not high and lows, constantly stimulating highs and lows. And sometimes, people with ADHD can kind of like really have that highs and lows. They need that stimulant as well, and they find it very difficult to be bored. So that was some of the symptoms that showed up. So the fixer that showed up for sure, and ended up in very toxic relationships. And also, one of the things that showed up for him as well, and it shows up for a lot of guys, is that when she's upset with him, it just rattles his world. So they cannot have anybody upset or angry at them, and they feel like they're in trouble. They feel like they've done something wrong. And what's happening is that they have this disapproval going on. I don't want anybody to be disapproving of me. And any moments of disapproving, or any moments of I'm not satisfied with what you've done, or maybe you're wrong. They don't want to be wrong. They feel like it takes them back to childhood when they were scolded for being naughty or being bad. They want to be in your good books, not in the bad books. So they're very uncomfortable to be disapproved. And they don't want people to be upset with them. So when that happens, they go into a frenzy of trying to fix the situation. They're trying to do whatever they can to make sure that the person is not upset or disapproving of them. So they'll end up over-explaining themselves, over-rationalizing, defending themselves, making excuses, even lying and withholding. So that's one of the characteristics of when somebody's upset with them and they're disapproving of them. They'll do anything to get back to the status quo of like, everybody love me, like me, and be happy with me. So they're always looking for that happiness. They don't have the courage to be disliked. They have to have somebody always liking them and loving them. And at face value, the ego might say, well, I'm fine. If nobody likes me, who cares? They might say that at face value, but deep down, they don't want people to be disapproval of them. So imagine you get a negative comment or feedback and criticism. It will really hurt them. It'll be really sharp and painful. So they might say something, the ego might just lash out and say, I'm okay with it. But deep down, they're usually quite hurt and painful about it. I can relate to a lot of this as well. And a lot of the time, because they're looking for external validation, they will find it very difficult to have any kind of disagreement or any kind of like negative thoughts or opinions about them. So they really care about what other people think about them. So again, this is very much the fractured man, the fractured individual. And the journey of healing from this begins by, first of all, I would say working on the 5 fractures, which is the first one is start to compose yourself, start to regulate your nervous system. Because as soon as you lose your nervous system, as soon as you lose yourself, lose your composure, which we all do. This is not about making it perfect. This is just about getting to a level where that most of the time you stay composed. Things will throw you off, but you come back to a state of groundedness. And from a groundedness, you can be more rational. When you're, say, lose your shit, you also lose your disrespect. That's what happens straight away. If somebody who loses themselves, loses their composure, we instantly lose respect for that person because they haven't got themselves together. They can't keep themselves together. So one of the things I teach is keep it together, is to keep things in rational, in a composed, cool, calm way. And if you have those relationships where it's very explosive, it can be very difficult to do. And it's something that I see myself, that the more composed and calm I am, and the other person's going chaotic, then they realize, actually, I'm the idiot. So, but if you're losing yourself, people think you're the idiot. So it's very important to calm yourself. The second part is the ego. The ego fracture, what's happening here is that you're taking things personally, you're getting offended, because usually when the ego is fractured, you have a real negative image of yourself. You have a very low self-worth of yourself. And how that shows up is either you will play very small and you'll pull away, or you'll become arrogant, you'll become overconfident, you'll try to overcompensate for your inferiority feelings. So this is very much an inferiority complex when it's fractured, is that you'll overcompensate. You'll try to flex a lot, you'll try to boast a lot, you're trying to show your self-worth. You'll over accommodate, you'll over please, because you're trying to show your self-worth, because you're getting that from the external one rather than the internal one. So that's the ego fracture coming in, and it gets offended really easily. It takes things personally, and it rattles easily. So that's why the nerve fracture, and then it triggers a nerve fracture, and then you lose your composure. And then the third fracture is the emotional fracture. And what's going on here is that emotionally, what you believe is, I'm unlovable. Okay, so the first one is I'm unsafe, the nerve. The second one is the ego feels that, I'm unworthy, I'm not enough. And this third one is the emotional fracture, which is I'm unlovable. They won't love me. And because when we have this internal fracture of emotional fracture of I'm being unlovable, what happens is that we cling on to relationships, and we settle for scraps of love. We try and do everything we can to get scraps of love from the outside world, and trying to validate the fact that is, okay, I am lovable. So what I'll do is I'll do anything. I'll be mistreated. I'll tolerate bad behavior, but as long as I'm getting some love, scraps of love, that it will feed me enough, and it'll pacify me. And in return, what you're doing is you're communicating that I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, and you're only going to get people who are going to give you scraps of love. And what happens is that when you only get scraps of love, you also become very sensitive to hurt. And when you become very sensitive to hurt, what happens is that when you end up feeling a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, you shut down, you become avoidant, or you will then either become avoidant and you become passive aggressive because you're upset and you want the other person to know that I'm upset. And what you're trying to do is invertedly trying to inflict pain on them. By shutting down, you're trying to hurt the other person, because you know that connection is very important for both of you. And when there's a disconnection, there's pain. And you know that when they disconnect from you and you feel pain, when you disconnect, you know that they're going to feel pain. So we try to, when we get hurt, what we do is either we're passive or we lash out. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to hurt the other person, because I'm hurting. I want you to feel how much pain I'm in. And that can happen with jealousy as well. When you get jealous, that you want to inflict, because jealousy is such a strong emotion and pain. You want the other person to stop in the tracks and realize that I'm hurting too. I'm feeling, and you want them to adjust their behavior and to stop causing the hurt. Now, there are two, I would say there's some two aspects to this. One is, yes, you need to take some responsibility. And if you haven't done enough work, emotional work, you are going to be oversensitive to jealousy. You're going to be oversensitive to being hurt, offended. So there's an aspect of you need to bring that up. And the other aspect we kind of like overlook, and a lot of people overlook this, is you want a partner who's compatible with you. And this is so important. You want somebody who's compatible with you. Now, for example, if you are quite sensitive person, and a lot of the guys I work with are really sensitive, they're real romantic, they want a great life, they want to build a beautiful life, they want happiness in their life, they want harmony in their life, but they have also a lot of fractures that they're demons that they're fighting with, and they don't know how to manage that. Neither do I. I'm still working on this, and I'm worked on with my coaches to a state where I'm getting to a really comfortable place. And a lot of the guys I work with, they get to a stronger place. Now, when you're hurting and you're inflicting on the other pains, and when you have somebody who's incompatible with you, what they do is they will amplify your insecurities, your fractures, and cause more pain. Now, for example, if you are with, if you do feel jealous and you're insecure a bit too much, but you pick a woman who's quite promiscuous, she flirts with every guy, she needs a lot of validation and approval from a lot of men. She has half naked photos of her on social media. She's constantly looking for validation and approval. And then you're like thinking, she's amazing, she's really hot, I want a kind of woman like this. But then you realize when you do get a woman like this, then you're trying to protect, or you're trying to dumb her down. Like, I don't want you to be out in public, but yet you saw her in public the way she was, but you want her to stop because it's affecting your insecurities. So what you've done, and you've chosen an incompatible woman with you. So you've chosen a woman because first she caught your eye because she was hot. She's on social media. She's really capturing you by sexualizing her beauty. And then you realize that when you're in a relationship and she's sexualizing her beauty, that you're finding yourself very insecure and very, very needy for her. And then you're getting very jealous about her because she's constantly thriving on other people's attraction and attention, which she did from you as well. So what you have now is a very incompatible woman, incompatible with your nervous system, incompatible with your fractures. Whereas if you chose a compatible woman who was more, I would say, like for me, that would be a very incompatible woman. I've been with women like that, and they've triggered my insecurities a lot. They've made me hyper vigilant, constantly on edge. Is she going to leave me for another guy? Is she going to find a better, strong, more handsome guys because she's getting all this attention? So I was constantly on edge. And then I realized that these women didn't, they like the attention too much to want to protect themselves and create a safe environment around their own maybe attention seeking. So a compatible woman, I realize over time, for me and guys who have I would say, over fractured, one, you got to do the work. And second thing is you got to choose a more compatible woman. So a compatible woman would look like she's more modest. She doesn't need a lot of validation and approval, especially from outside strangers. She doesn't seek that. She's more mature. She can get that from herself. And she looks for more connection, and she values that. She doesn't need her ego to be massaged. Neither do you, right? So when you've both done the work, you don't need that. You both are more secure, and you get a lot internally than externally. I know they say the feminine gets everything from the external. Yes, I can get that, but also a mature woman, I rather use the word mature versus immature, because that helps me to understand that somebody is either in adolescence, stuck in that stage, or they're becoming an adult. And an adult man and an adult mature man and a mature woman act and behave very differently. They act in a much more sophisticated manner. They act in a much more mature manner that isn't constantly triggering each other. So maturity is something that, again, we all have to be working towards. I'm constantly working towards this. I fall into immaturity behaviors, and when I'm immature, the boy really comes out in me, and I see that in a lot of the guys I work with. So when we're immature, we can lash out, we can be very stubborn, we can be very controlling, we can not see, we can be manipulating as well, and these are all human behaviors. They're all natural in every single part. So when we hurt, we can really go into this. We can lash out. When we feel safe, when we feel secure, when we feel not threatened, our nervous system is calm. So we're more in calmness, and we're more rational. And you want people around you who can bring that out more. So they're more compatible. But if you are around people that are constantly unhealthy, constantly triggering you all the time, and I mean constantly, it's not that you don't want those people around you, because you do want to build that muscle. But if it's a constant, um, it's like you want to build your muscles, but you don't want to do it with extreme heavy weights. So you don't want to do that with extreme heavy toxic relationships. You want to be able to build those muscles and have a capacity where you're maintaining those muscles. And more secure women, modest women, mature women are really will really serve you long term, right? They will really serve you. Now, the downside is, when it comes to maturity, is it can feel really boring. It can feel like, they have no personality. There's nothing about them. And because your body is so used to like highs and lows, that the mature, sensible person who doesn't need conflict all the time, doesn't need drama, isn't opposing personalities, they don't have all these disorders, and they can feel really boring. And when they feel really boring, you're looking for stimulation. And when you're looking for stimulation, what happens is that if you haven't matured, you will look for it in the wrong places. By looking for stimulation in the wrong places, then you'll end up either cheating, having affairs, getting addicted to anything that brings you stimulation. But when you build healthier habits, and one of the things I do with the guides is I have a group for building habits, which is to really help them stop being so high and low and addicted to stimulation. Now, what masterful men do, what mature men do, is they start to go from highs and lows, because you'll have these highs and lows, and your emotional state will be the same. 1 minute you're really happy, 1 minute you're really sad, 1 minute you're excited, and 1 minute you're like really down. So you'll have these pendulum swings, and it might also come in your finances. I've got money and I'm broke, or I'm fit or I'm unhealthy and I'm unfit. So you'll have these constant pendulum swings. And I'm feeling secure and confident. I feel unworthy and I have no confidence and no self-esteem. So you have all of these pendulum swings. And what masterful men do, when you have consistency and habits in your life, your pendulum swings then starts to slow down. And it doesn't mean it's completely ended, no. And what happens is that, say something tough happens in your life, something more adversity that comes into your life, it'll hit your pendulum. But what happens is, instead of like going all over the place, it will for a bit, but it comes back and it stabilizes back really quickly. And that's one of the most wonderful things I hear from the guys I work with, is they say that I I still have the same emotions. We all do. You don't get rid of your emotions, but you learn to manage them. The wonderful thing they say is I recover in like really quickly. So instead of taking weeks and months to recover, I can recover within days. And sometimes they can recover even quicker than that. So when adversity happens, they don't collapse anymore. Like a child will collapse and they expect everybody, they'll have a tantrum, they expect everybody else to fix their problems. What happens is that when we have the capacity, when we build a strong, mature, masculine foundation in ourselves, then we're able to be more dependent on that, and it keeps us propped up. So your emotional pendulum then becomes a lot more secure and recovers much more. And that, again, builds more self-esteem, self-worth, because when you're going to chaos, when somebody is constantly, you're second guessing yourself all the time, that's just eroding your confidence, your self-worth. So in life, when we're doing masterful things, we're doing consistent things, and that's what I have this unique group for, is because then it starts to build confidence, and it's step by step, and it takes time. And here's one of the things I say to guys is you can do the performance work. The performance work is easy. It looks good, it feels good, but it's temporary, right? Because that's what the ego wants. It wants that hit. Ego loves like quick, instant hits. Whereas our spirit part, the spiritual part of us, I love the saying is, you cannot skip the lessons of life. Whereas the ego is always looking for shortcuts. But when you build a strong foundation, it takes longer. And the boy in me wants like instant gratification. The girl in a woman wants instant gratification. But the mature person understands that if you're going to build something that's worth having, that's of substantial amount and magnitude, that it will take time. And that's where mastery comes in. That's where self development comes in, is doing the long work, the boring work. And when you're doing the boring work, you'll come across something called a plateau. So you'll find that you're not having a lot of results. And that's where a lot of people will give up. Is I'm working on something, I'm working on my personal development, Faisal, and I'm not seeing any results. Is because that abandonment, engulfment, and you're constantly looking for those highs and lows. When you're doing some solid work, grounding work, you'll hit a plateau where nothing. And it's a bit like the bamboo, right? So bamboo is when you will see that nothing happens. Year 1, year 2, there's nothing going on. And then, in the final year, the 5th year or something, the bamboo just shoots up. That's what foundation work is like. So you have to really trust the process. You have to trust the principles. You have to trust the history that has worked. And then you have to be mature to realize that you're going to be working on your foundation, and there's going to be times when it's going to feel boring, but it's building a foundation. So a lot of things in life are going to feel boring, but they're good for you. This is where you develop good mental health and stimulation of not needing high stimulation. You just need enough. This is why going out for a walk in nature, it's calming. Whereas people who are really addicted, they'll get addicted to the gym. Have you ever seen somebody who's like constantly at the gym 24 hours? They live there. I've met some men and women who just get addicted to the highs of the gym, because the gym, again, it gives you that real tension. And then afterwards, there's a massive feeling of all the adrenaline, the endorphins that come from afterwards. It's that reward chemicals. And we get addicted to those reward chemicals. And again, it's that same thing in relationships as well. It's like that, those chemicals, we're very much addicted to drugs. And the same thing when we have toxic relationships. Susan Anderson, she did an amazing book. It's healing from healings from abandonment. So check her workout. And this is kind of like early work I did when I went through after my breakup. There was a massive abandonment. And what she said was a lot of people will confuse, say, the chemistry, the real feelings of, oh, I find the one, this is the one. They'll confuse those emotions with love. But actually what's happening is those are the emotion, those are the chemicals. And she calls it like, they're so strong, they're like opioids, right? They are like opium, and they're coursing through your body. And those feels like, I found the one, I love her, or I love him. And it's those chemicals that confuse people to love. Love has got nothing to do with the emotions. It's got to do with a lot of the what's purposeful. And to me, that's what love is. It's purposeful acts, not because they're emotional based, but are they purposeful? Because I love her, I want her back. That's my need. But if you guys want a woman back, but she's unhealthy for you, that's not an act of love. That's an act of you're drug connected, you're infused, you're attached to that person because of those chemicals, and you can't extract yourself away from that. So don't confuse love with those chemicals, and it's easy to do. I'll post something on that one. There's a really good I did post this from Susan Anderson, and she explains how the chemicals confuse it. I remember I was dating this girl, and when I was really exploring coming out of the marriage, and I was exploring like open relationships, and this girl had, she was into multiple relationships and she wasn't the kind of person to settle down and have a committed relationship, but it was a great learning as I was working on my emotions. Because we had an open relationship, I really worked on my need for jealousy, my insecurities, because she'd be with her other lover. And I remember one day we broke, we ended our relationship, very amicable, and that's very important. Amicable breakups. If you can't do amicable breakups, there's something real deep inside of you that's going on. So a year later, she phones me up, and I was like, "Hey, I haven't heard from you in ages. How are you?" And she goes, "Oh, Faisal, I'm in a terrible state." I said, "Oh, what's going on?" And she said, "Look, I'm in another country. I'm taking a 2-week out because I've been stuck in a toxic relationship." I said, "Okay." And she said, "Look, I just can't get away." I'm like, "Well, you know what to do." And she says, "I do, but I can't." I said, "Okay." And she said, "What do you suggest?" And I said, "What has everybody else suggested? I'm sure I'm not the first person to ask it." She said, "Oh, my parents have said, come home now, leave the guy. And all my friends say leave." And I'm like, "Okay, but you're not going to leave him, are you?" And she said, "I want to." I said, "I know, but you're not going to leave him." I said, "Because if you did, you would have not moved to another neighboring country. You would have left and come home." And she said, "So what should I do?" I said, "Well, it's not what I will tell you to do, because you won't follow logic. You'll follow your chemicals. And those chemicals will dictate your emotion. They'll dictate what you do." And I said, "Here's what's going to happen is you're going to go back." And she goes, "I don't want to." I said, "I know that's what you don't want, but you're not run by your logic. You're run by your chemicals." So I said, "Here's what you do. You go back, and then you have to wait until your chemicals wear off, or you get to a stage of where I'm not enough to I've had enough." So she was at the stage of I'm not enough. So when we're at the stage of I'm not enough, we'll tolerate bad behavior. We'll tolerate scraps of love. We will tolerate being a doormat. So when we're at the stage of I'm not enough, I said, you have to hit I've had enough. At I've had enough is the breaking point where change comes, right? This is like rock bottom. When you've had enough, you will override everything, every obstacle, all the chemicals when you hit that point. Now, for some people, it can take a lot to hit that point. Some people, you can never change anybody. Have you ever tried to change somebody and know what happens, or what you say, or you give them the best logical, but you can never change somebody, because when they're trapped in this chemical mix, they only change when they've had enough, when they've got to that point. And I said, when you get to the point of I've had enough, I've had enough of the abuse, the tolerating, all that stuff. I said, because if you wanted to, you could have left, but you haven't. You're going to go back and you're going to follow your chemicals and you're going to follow those old patterns. And then you're going to leave. And guess what? Most people do. Most people leave when they've had enough, when they get to that stage, the rock bottom. Whereas mature people, what they'll do is they'll navigate and they'll understand and they'll override those chemicals because they've been working on their habits. They've been working on masterful things. Because in masterful things, you have to override your chemicals because you're constantly thinking, nothing's working. I'm not having any results. And you're thinking, because I'm not having any results, nothing's working. You still continue. Because you're building that muscle. Once you build that muscle and become strong, then you can fight other things. That's how I fought, my need to watch porn. I don't watch porn anymore. I haven't watched it for years. And because I worked on those masterful muscles, I can then work on a lot more patterns where I would have normally got addicted. So I don't have massive addictions in my life. I still do things that I wish I didn't. Sometimes I indulge in food that I shouldn't, but it's not to a point where it's damaging my life. It's not to a point where I can't have temperance and control. Yeah, I might overindulge in a little bit, but then I can always bring myself back and then get to a good rhythm. I'm not to a point where I have addictions in my life, that I constantly rely and depend on them. So that's because I'm constantly working on doing the masterful things. And when you're working on the masterful things, it took years. I'm not saying it's an easy win. And I appreciate all the coaches and the support and all the men that have helped me. And that's one of the most important things is you've got to have accountability. You've got to have people witnessing your journey. It's because when we are witnessed, then it works on shame. It works on healing. The aspect of that, what you normally hide. So there's no more hiding space. And this is what YouTube, listening to you endless YouTube channels, really endless books, but not actually getting the work done where other humans can see you. Because if you can't have that witness, then you cannot work on the shame. And shame expands, or shame gets more intense in secrecy, in hiding. When we show our flaws, when we show that, we're not perfect, and then it's witnessed by somebody else, that's when shame starts to heal. The more shame we have, the more our life is suffocating, the more we're suffocated in life. And that's such an important thing to remember, is the more shame we have, the more it rules our life. And the less we feel ourselves, the less we feel open and being ourselves, being true and being authentic. Is like, hey, this is what works for me. This doesn't work for me. But when we have shame, we're always trying to please other people, not look bad, not look, not do the, I would say, terrible things. But what shame does, this is important, is it keeps us in check. So healthy amount of shame is necessary because it keeps you in check. Because if you had no shame, you probably stand up on the table and start getting naked or doing things, and whereas healthy shame will keep you in check. Shame is necessary. Shame helps you to understand rules of engagement, and it helps you to understand not to put yourself in danger or in threat or in disreputation. So that's, shame is necessary. But when we have an excessive amount of shame, we end up people pleasing, we end up lying, we end up showing a different self, especially when we go out dating. We'll show the best self. You'll see Instagram, so what do you do on activities? I do this, I do, I'm skiing and sports and constantly, and then you find out they're actually, most of their life pretty much is boring. So they have shame is very much of an Instagram life. The ego loves to show the world perfection because we don't have an integration of ourselves where we feel we're whole. So shame allows us to become, bring in our flaws that we've been pushing out, so our shadow, and then integrating that. And if you don't work on the shame, when we internalize shame and we're being bad, when it's externalized, how shame comes out as is more sabotaging ways. So we end up sabotaging, we end up more addictions because we're trying to compress this shame. And the more you compress shame, it's like never taking the trash, the garbage out from your kitchen and letting that all build up. It'll stink, it'll smell, and then you'll have an adverse reaction to it. And that's what happens with shame, is the more you compress it down, the more you hide it, it will externalize. It'll burst. And then you might just have spend too much money, or go and do adulterous things, or things, or have an affair, or get addicted to alcohol or drugs, or sex, or any kind of shopping or mobile phone. So it'll come out. The shame will come out in some ways. And you can see that. There's a really good book on this. It's called Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw. So check that one out. And I think Bernie Brown did Daring Greatly. Great. Again, some great books on that. I have loads of books that I can recommend as well. But it's not just the books that we need. We need guides. We need people. We need support. And we are social creatures. And it says that it takes a village to raise a man, and it takes a village to raise a daughter, a girl. So we need support. We need connection. We need people around us. And without that, you will find that you'll be isolated. You will have a lot more problems in your life because you have nobody to lean on, nobody to help you, support you. So we need men and women in our lives. And right now, this is a crisis, especially in the West, where we're becoming much more isolated, especially in big cities, because we don't have that connection. And a lot of guys I work with are entrepreneurs, they're successful, they work home. And the incredible thing is, and it's really frustrating, I can't believe this, is that they don't even leave the house. I'm like, what? You haven't been outside for a walk? Like, no, I've been just working 2-3 days in the house. I'm like, this is so unnatural. This is not what men were built for. We were built to be outside, moving in nature, get some sunlight, just get out the house. No wonder your mental health is suffering. Because you don't have the right mental health support. You don't have the right habits, the masterful habits that keep you propped up, keep you sane, keep you in good line. Guys, thank you. I appreciate you taking some time to listen to this. I'm just sharing some of the stuff that I'm learning. I'm learning for myself. And my purpose as a man is to pass on this knowledge, to pass on the wisdom, kick your butt as well. That's the most important thing. Is I have a lot of coaches that kick my butt and they call me out so they can raise me up, right? So they're calling me up. That's the most important thing, is they're calling me out. And if you're open to be called out, if you're open to rise, if you're open to build a strong foundation, reach out to other men who are helping and teaching you. I do this too. Reach out to me if you resonate with my work. Reach out to me, because I believe that the worst life to live is a life full of insecurities. You can have everything in the world. You can have the house, the woman, the wife, the kids, money, property, cars, everything. But if you feel empty, unworthy, insecure, constantly comparing yourself, feeling envious of others, you feel rotten inside and you're eroding away, that's not a life. That is not fulfillment. That's the ultimate failure for me, is if you are insecure inside. Because you want to be in a place where whether you have everything or you have nothing, you feel good inside. And the same thing with a relationship. I'm good with you, I'm good without you. When you can get to that energy, and that's the energy I call the charisma energy, the aura, the magnetic energy of life, the world. And when you can get to that stage, and you can get to that stage, you can build yourself. It won't come at perfection, but it'll come at a place where you're at a tipping point where you go, life's not perfect, but it has some perfect moments. All right. Stay blessed.